Well, I'm here today with Pat LaBarbera. Pat is a missionary, really a tent-making ministry. We'll get into that in just a minute. But Pat, you really sell health insurance, if you will. You're a vendor to help connect people with their health insurance needs, and that's part of your tent-making ministry. And I say that because you've been doing our health insurance for really 10 years now, and we've just had a wonderful working relationship with you. But you're here today because a part of that tent-making ministry is you're a missionary to the Ukrainian people. And that's certainly in the news right now. And so I want to thank you for being here. This is Pat LaBarbera with his foundation, and just so glad to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me here.
Just for those that are viewing and are a part of this today, I'd ask you to share a little bit about your heart, kind of how long you've been serving in the Ukraine. Tell me a little bit about your ministry, how that works with you as far as being tent making, and then we'll get a little more into the situation in the Ukraine today.
All right. I've been living in Ukraine for the last 20 years. August, September, October, November, December, I'm here. I'm doing open enrollment, helping small businesses, individuals, retirees do their health insurance. Right. Then December 15th, when that basically ends, I leave and go back to Ukraine, which is good for us because I get 2 Christmases. They celebrate Christmas on January 7th. And then January, February, March, April, May, I'm a professor. I teach international economics, which is basically Dave Ramsey's financial piece, but they call it international economics, and medical triage in English. My background is I went to medical school for about 10 years. So I do that to bring the college kids to our house so we can tell them about Jesus Christ. Right, and then during the summers, June, July, and August, we do free medical clinics in remote Russian-speaking villages with my students, the medical triage, and American physicians. We've done it with dentists, ophthalmologists, orthopedics, and so on and so forth. And that's basically our ministry.
Yeah, excellent. So you spend, I guess, 7 months in Ukraine and then 5 months here in the States each year. That's how you balance your independent tent-making ministry, right?
Yeah. I did not want to do deputation, so I just 5 here, 7 there, 5 here, 7 there.
Yeah. So you've been sent out by a church, but you're independent in the sense that you're not with a mission organization. You're really sent out as a missionary of a church. You're in the Ukraine, and not to did you need any more street credentials, but you have married a Ukrainian bride. Your kids are Ukrainian, and so you really just have a love for the people of that land.
Yeah.
And again, you've been doing it for 20 years, and so you're really an authority on this subject, as we'll be talking about today, right? Yeah. So we won't get into too much of geopolitical politics, all right? So we'll keep you out of that. But I do want to talk to you about, the Ukrainian people. I mean, certainly we're watching the news. We're seeing what is happening between Russia and the Ukraine and that whole region. I mean, it's just on edge right now. And we can see things, especially here from the American viewpoint, kind of the aerial view. But I want you to speak to the heart of the Ukrainian people. Help me to understand, what is the Ukraine? What does it mean to be Ukrainian? Tell me about the Ukrainian people so we can identify a little differently with what's going on on the ground.
Ukraine has been through a lot. Ukraine was its own country, and then it was taken over by the USSR, and it was in the USSR for right around, I think, 32 years. Right? And then in 1991, it became its own independent nation. A little bit more about Ukraine in that regard. During World War II, half of the country fought against the other half of the country. Half fought with the Nazis, and the other half fought with the Allies. So it's kind of split. You might even be able to use that river running right down the country, the Dnieper. I'm not saying that's a hard border, but use that as kind of a guide, where the people on the west are hard Ukrainian. Like in the 20 years that I've spent there, right, I never took a Russian lesson. Right, I just learned by what it is that I hear. I can teach in Russian in university, so I have a good level. Right, but I speak Russian, not Ukrainian. If I go over to the west side of the country, where it is we live now, right, everybody speaks Ukrainian. Now, they can understand Russian, but they speak Ukrainian. If you go to the east side of the country, which is where my wife is from, everybody just speaks Russian. They don't speak Ukrainian at all. Now, they have to do it in the universities, they have to do it in the schools, but every day if you went to the street, if you went to the supermarket, they would speak Russian. So it kind of splits the country up that way. But they are Ukrainian, right? It is one nation, and they want to remain independent.
What are the people like? I mean, describe the Ukrainian people to me.
A Ukrainian once explained it to me this way, that Ukrainians are like watermelons. They're hard on the outside, but soft and sweet on the inside. And I think that's pretty true. If you were to walk down the street and say, hey, good morning, they would look at you like, why are you talking to me? Right? But if your car broke down, 4 guys will help you jack it up and change your tire and help you out the best that they can. If you were in a village and you were a stranger there, they would invite you into their house and empty the refrigerator to help feed you, even though they might not be able to eat next week. They're an amazingly hospitable and wonderful people.
So where do you think that hard exterior comes from?
All the oppression. Ukraine has had its borders changed 12 times in the last 70 years. They've been oppressed by the covering of the USSR. I mean, they call him Dada Lenin. They would say Uncle Lenin, right? And those statues have been pulled down, repainted, destroyed. They just keep getting beat, and they know they have no faith in their government. My wife always makes a joke. She goes, the problem with America is it's so young and you guys still have hope for your government. We already know the government will never help us and we live our own lives. Yeah.
Well, I'm a guy in politics, usually New York politics and American politics, and I can tell you I have no hope in our political system, right? But that's why it's great that we're here today to talk about these things, because your wife's not wrong in that regard. Politics is not the answer. Our greatest need is always spiritual, not political, which is why I love the work that you're involved in, working with the Ukrainian people. So as we think about this situation, talk to me about is there a sense of nationalism among the Ukrainians? Or you mentioned the borders have changed. How does that impact the political views or the thinking of the Ukrainian people?
The political views, I think Ukrainians are always going to think what's best for me. Not what's best for Ukraine, what's best for me at that moment. If Russia's going to come over and they're telling them, hey, listen, we're going to give you a better job, we'll increase your salary, we'll give you a stipend, because communists, right, everybody gets on the same level. Socialists, you have to work a little bit harder, right? They'll choose it. The same thing happened in Crimea. When Russia came in to take over Crimea, they offered them to get rid of their mortgages, right, and then reneged after they voted. So yes, the people in Crimea did vote to become Russian, right, but they were lied to, and then those homes got taken back. Yeah. So the Ukrainians will do what's best for them. I can guarantee you right now, every Ukrainian in the country is buying dollars or euros, because whoever it is that ends up taking over their country next, they'll be able to buy the new currency and be able to live just as it is.
So it's really, when you say they're going to do what's best in their own interest, it's a basic survival mode is what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, my wife will say that. She goes, they don't live, they don't thrive, they survive. And if they can get out, they'll help.
Yeah, yeah. So as we think about the political scene there, we watch what's happening. We're recording this on Monday, President's Day at this time, so a lot can change. But I know that sanctions have just come down from some of the European nations have placed sanctions on Russia over what's happening. I know that President Vladimir Putin has just announced that the eastern portion of Ukraine is independent. I don't even know what that means or understand what that is yet, but it just seems like these various levers are being applied. And I think it matters for Christians to be aware of what's going on, because this isn't just about Russia and some faraway land that, the Ukraine. This is about what's going to happen generationally. I think what happens in the next few days and weeks could have a tremendous impact on whether or not my children and yours are going to live in peace or not. We have not seen a nation, something of this magnitude, to where unprovoked, a nation like Russia has gone and sought to take another nation back into its fold, if you will. And so what happens and how the international community responds to whatever President Putin does really could set us up for some very scary times internationally, and maybe a time of international conflict or war in years to come. So Christians should be praying about that. What are some ways that we can pray for the Ukrainian people at this time?
Well, first, and it sounds trite, but it's not trite. Pray for Zelensky. Pray for our president. Pray for the president of Ukraine. He needs to make some wise decisions and to be able to pull a rabbit out of his hat. Because if it comes to a fight, as much as I love my Ukrainian brothers, and I would go back tomorrow if I could go back, right? They won't win. That would be like Texas telling the United States that they don't want to be part of the United States anymore, right? And the United States being like, sure. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Texans, the Cowboys, they have their own guns and get it, but they're not going to win against the other 49 states, right? If you looked at the population of Ukraine versus Russia, they're not going to win. They need help. And I would say Europe has been not assisting at all, because Ukraine's that buffer state, right? It's the Polish, Ukraine is part of Europe, the continent. If you ask a Ukrainian, are you European? He'd say no, right? So the Polish, the Czechoslovakians, the French, the Italians, they don't think Ukraine is part of their section, right? The Russians think it is part of their portion, so they just want their portion back. And Ukraine's that little buffer zone where it's not Poland. Now, if they were on the border of Poland, this would all change, right? Like, how many countries would get involved if the Russians were on the border to invade Poland? That'd be a lot different than Ukraine. And unfortunately, the Ukrainians are the people that are getting used in the middle, and I don't like that.
Yeah. Well, the Bible tells us to pray for those in authority over us. And so you mentioned praying for the leaders of the Ukraine, but I think about praying for our own administration here as well. It's a critical time. And I've been critical of the Biden administration and how they've handled the matter regarding Russia. And I think it really is the continuation of what we saw under President Obama's foreign policy. And I'm concerned about that. It's been a very weak policy that I think has strengthened Russian President Vladimir Putin. But nonetheless, I am praying for our president. I'm praying for Vice President Kamala Harris, because the words they say, the actions they take, whatever advice they're receiving and what they do is going to have an impact on where the international community is going to go on this issue, and it will determine whether or not we're going to have war or peace for my children's and your children's generation. So I'm concerned about that. We're certainly watching that, and I'm praying for the administration. Now tell me, if you were still there, and I know it's got to be just breaking your heart to not be there right now with the people you love. If you could speak words to the Ukrainian people and to your brothers and sisters there in the trials they're facing, what would you say to the Ukrainians?
Надежда и терпение. Hope and patience. If you've ever heard of Voice of the Martyrs, Richard Wurmbrand wrote Tortured for Christ. Well, that happened about 45 minutes from where I live in Ukraine. So this poor country is used to being pushed around and bullied and run, and I would tell my people that they have hope in Jesus Christ, right? That they can't look to their government, that they can't look to the dollar, they can't look to the euro, they can't look to anything other than Jesus Christ. Does this mean that he's coming back? Well, it might feel that way to them, right? Because their whole world's coming to a crashing end. But they've done this before. They've been through famine after famine after famine. Every year, Russia turns off the gas to make them freeze out in the wintertime. Right? Every year they try to get out or come back, or maybe we're moving more towards Europe, right? Because I think that's where most of them want to go. If they were given the choice to be part of NATO, to be part of the European Union, if it was just a vote for the country, they would want to. They don't want to go back. But if they're not going to be accepted by one and they're given open arms from the other, that's where they'd want to go. So I would tell them that there's hope. There is hope. And you can wait it out. You can wait it out, be strong. You've done this before. Your relatives have done it before. And if I was there with them, I'd bring them all to me as much as we could, and we would pray for this resolution so that even if something were to happen, and I'm sorry if this isn't a geopolitical thing, it's more of a heart thing, even if Russia were to take over, and I do not want Russia to take over Ukraine, I would pray that they would be able to do it without any bloodshed, right? So that at least the people can live and hope and have a chance to repent and be saved, right, and go to heaven. If all of these people die in this war to stop them from going over and we win, but all of these people died to go to hell, that's not really something I would want for them.
Yeah. So the greatest need is always spiritual, not political, isn't it?
Always.
Yeah. And hope is something that all peoples need, and something that I think that oftentimes when people talk about our work with New Yorkers, they say, how do you not get discouraged? And I say, well, my hope is not in this world, right?
That's right.
And yet that's the message of hope that every Christian can carry. It's not one of defeat. It's one of victory in Jesus Christ. And we can certainly pray that for the Ukrainian people as well. Well, Pat, I just want to thank you for being a part of this interview today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for agreeing to come in and share your heart for the Ukrainian people. And we'll certainly have Christians all across the state and the nation praying for what's going on in that region of the world, and specifically for the people there in need of a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Thank you.